Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a fascinating part of history, the story behind Napoleon's tall hat, or more specifically, his iconic bicorne hat. You probably know it, wide, with two peaks, and instantly recognizable in every portrait of the French emperor. It might seem like just a piece of fashion, a quirky accessory that he wore to stand out, but tonight, we're going to explore how this hat was much more than that. Napoleon's hat wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a carefully chosen symbol of power, authority, and even his strategic brilliance. It became his visual trademark, a piece of his identity that the world came to recognize as synonymous with his reign. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and local time, I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When we think of Napoleon Bonaparte, the first thing that often comes to mind is his military prowess. But there's something else, the way he curated his image. Napoleon wasn't just a military leader, he was a master of propaganda, and his hat was one of the tools he used to project power. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about shaping how people saw him. In an era before mass media, the image of a leader was crucial, and Napoleon understood that well. The bicorne hat became a symbol that represented more than just his taste, it was about his ambition, his reign, and the lasting legacy he wanted to build. Now that we've established the importance of Napoleon's tall hat, let's take a closer look at the shape itself, the bicorne hat, and why it became so closely associated with him. The bicorne, with its two peaks, might seem like a simple accessory, but its design had significant meaning in the context of military fashion and Napoleon's image. The name itself, bicorne, simply means two-pointed, and this hat was designed to be worn sideways, with the points either to the front or the back. This was a departure from the traditional cocked hat that had been popular in European military fashion, and it would come to symbolize Napoleon's break from the norms of the past. The bicorne hat wasn't just fashionable, it was functional too. It was large enough to protect the wearer from the sun and rain, which was practical for a military leader who spent so much time outdoors and on the battlefield. But it was also a bold statement piece, designed to make the wearer stand out. Napoleon's decision to adopt this hat style was strategic. It had a certain theatricality to it, allowing him to be easily recognizable, even from a distance. The high contrast of the black wool felt and the simple yet elegant shape made it stand out among the sea of military uniforms, creating an image that was both dignified and commanding. Historians still argue about whether Napoleon chose the bicorne hat simply because of its practicality or if he was deliberately trying to craft an image. Some believe the design was intended to draw attention and establish Napoleon as a unique figure, distinct from the monarchs and generals of his time. Others argue that it was a more functional choice. After all, Napoleon was often in the thick of battle, and the hat served as a practical piece of military attire. Whether driven by fashion, practicality, or a mix of both, the hat became inseparable from Napoleon's image. Worn sideways, the bicorne made Napoleon appear taller, more imposing. Its shape and size added to the illusion of his presence on the battlefield. However, it also served another, more subtle purpose: it projected authority. In an era where military uniforms were often elaborate and symbolic, the bicorne was a part of the uniform that conveyed power and recognition. The 2 points, almost like horns or arrows, could be interpreted as symbols of direction, ambition, and dominance. Napoleon's hat wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a visual shorthand for his leadership and military genius. As you lie down to rest tonight, think about the simple yet profound power of an image. Napoleon's choice of hat, much like the small symbols we use today to express our identities, carried weight. Whether in a portrait or on the battlefield, Napoleon's tall bicorne hat told the world exactly who he was, and how he wanted to be seen, a leader who didn't just follow tradition, but reshaped it to fit his image. Just like Napoleon crafted his identity with his iconic hat, we, too, curate the way we present ourselves to the world, sometimes without even thinking about it. As we continue our journey into the history of Napoleon's iconic bicorne hat, it's important to touch on a curious aspect of the man himself. his height, and how it interacted with his choice of headwear. Napoleon has often been depicted as being much shorter than his contemporaries, with various myths and jokes circulating about his height. The famous perception of Napoleon as a small man, a figure dwarfed by his mighty empire, has persisted throughout history. However, this image is largely based on misconceptions and distorted accounts. Napoleon's actual height was likely around 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7 inches, about 1.68 meters, which was quite average for a French man during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. But the myth of Napoleon's height became widespread, partly due to discrepancies between French and British measurements at the time, as well as a strong desire by the British to belittle him during and after his reign. These misconceptions about his stature contributed to his image as a leader who sought to compensate for his perceived shortness by projecting strength and power in other ways. Enter the bicorne hat, a crucial part of how Napoleon managed this public image. Though the hat was designed to be worn sideways and was already a statement piece, it also had the practical effect of making Napoleon appear taller. When Napoleon wore his bicorne hat, it added height to his overall appearance, creating an illusion of greater stature. The large brim and upward peaks created a visual balance that made Napoleon seem taller than he was, subtly counteracting the persistent narrative that he was too short to be a commanding figure. Historians still debate whether Napoleon deliberately chose the bicorne for this purpose or if it was simply the fashionable military headgear of the time. Some scholars believe that the choice of a large, dramatic hat was purely symbolic, a reflection of Napoleon's desire to create a larger-than-life persona. His height, after all, was a source of constant commentary, and the hat, in many ways, became a tool to combat these perceptions. Others suggest that Napoleon's use of the bicorne was less about counteracting the short myth and more about establishing a personal style that marked him as unique among military leaders of the time. Regardless of his exact intentions, the use of the tall hat to elevate his appearance speaks to a larger theme in Napoleon's leadership, his careful attention to personal image. Napoleon understood the power of appearances, both in terms of fashion and symbolism. The way he presented himself wasn't just about clothing, it was about constructing an identity that matched the grandeur of his ambitions. From his military uniform to his carefully styled hair, everything about Napoleon's appearance was crafted to project strength, authority, and control. As you settle into your own rest tonight, imagine Napoleon standing tall in his iconic bicorne hat, surveying his empire with a commanding presence. Despite the myths surrounding his height, he carefully crafted an image that ensured he was seen as a towering figure, one who would go down in history as both a military genius and an indomitable leader. Perhaps, in our own way, we too craft our images for the world to see, shaping the way others perceive us just as Napoleon did, whether consciously or unconsciously. Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't just a military genius, he was also a master of personal branding. While he is primarily remembered for his military campaigns, the way he presented himself, his clothing, his style, his iconic bicorne hat, was just as integral to his image as his battlefield victories. Napoleon understood the importance of crafting an appearance that projected power, authority, and, perhaps more importantly, a sense of control over his destiny. His military uniform, complete with the signature tall hat, was a key part of this effort. Napoleon didn't just wear his military uniform for practical reasons, it was a carefully curated outfit meant to convey a message. The color scheme, the cut, the insignia, every detail of his attire was chosen to reflect his role as emperor and military leader. His uniform was designed to blend both revolutionary and imperial symbols, creating an image of a ruler who was both part of the people and above them. The uniform symbolized his break from the old royal traditions, yet it was also a nod to the traditional symbols of power. By combining military regalia with elements of the French revolutionary spirit, Napoleon crafted an identity that reflected both his rise to power and his ambition to establish a new order. Beyond his uniform, Napoleon's attention to his personal appearance was legendary. He wasn't just concerned with looking the part, he was also deeply involved in setting the trends of his time. The tall hat, for example, wasn't just for practical reasons, it became a symbol of Napoleon himself, immediately recognizable in any portrait or on the battlefield. His military coat, draped with gold epaulets and lavish decorations, was as much a part of his persona as his military strategy. Napoleon knew that in order to maintain his authority, his outward appearance had to match the power he wielded. Historians still debate how much Napoleon's obsession with his appearance was tied to his insecurity or whether it was a calculated move to solidify his image as a leader. Some suggest that, as someone who rose from humble beginnings, Napoleon was particularly sensitive about his image and wanted to ensure that he was perceived as a figure of grandeur and respect. Others argue that his fashion choices were simply a reflection of the times. Napoleon lived in an age where rulers and military leaders were expected to dress in a way that commanded respect and instilled confidence. Regardless of the debate, it's clear that Napoleon understood the power of his image. His carefully curated appearance, from his uniform to his tall bicorne hat, played a major role in how he was perceived by both his enemies and his subjects. In many ways, his clothes spoke louder than words. His image as a charismatic leader, who could inspire his troops and lead them to victory, was solidified by the way he presented himself to the world. The hat became a symbol not only of Napoleon's power but of his self-awareness, his control over how he was viewed, and his ability to command respect without saying a word. As you rest tonight, think of Napoleon standing tall, his tall bicorne hat perched perfectly on his head, his uniform impeccable. His appearance wasn't just about fashion, it was a statement, a carefully constructed image that reinforced his authority. Much like Napoleon, we too can consider how we present ourselves to the world, recognizing that our appearance often speaks as loudly as our actions. Whether it's through the clothes we wear or the way we carry ourselves, we all craft our own images, shaping how others perceive us. As we continue our exploration of Napoleon's iconic bicorne hat, let's dive into the deeper connection between the hat and Napoleon's military persona. Beyond being a symbol of power and authority, the bicorne hat was also an important part of Napoleon's identity as a military leader. It wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a strategic choice, perfectly aligned with Napoleon's understanding of how image and leadership intersected. The design of his hat reflected the era's military uniforms, but Napoleon's choice to wear it with such regularity elevated it to something more symbolic, a visual embodiment of his military genius. Napoleon was a master of battlefield strategy, but he was also a master of psychological warfare. He knew that his troops needed to believe in his leadership, and his carefully crafted image played an important role in creating that belief. The tall bicorne hat, worn at a jaunty angle, became instantly recognizable and was seen as part of Napoleon's military brilliance. The hat made him stand out in crowds, whether he was on horseback commanding his troops or giving orders on the battlefield. By wearing the bicorne so consistently, Napoleon ensured that his image would be etched into the memories of those who followed him. The military nature of the hat was also reinforced by the way it was worn. Napoleon often wore his bicorne hat in a way that was distinctive from other military leaders. Unlike many officers, who wore their hats front-facing, Napoleon preferred to wear his sideways. This subtle difference in style made him stand out from other generals and soldiers, creating a unique visual identity. The sideways placement of the hat was bold and striking, almost as if it was meant to convey that Napoleon was a man who didn't conform to the usual norms. He was a visionary, a man who made his own rules, both on the battlefield and in life. Historians still debate the specific role that Napoleon's hat played in his relationship with his soldiers. Some suggest that the hat served as a powerful symbol, one that gave Napoleon a larger-than-life presence, and that the troops identified with it as a symbol of his authority and leadership. Others argue that the hat was more of a personal choice, reflecting his unique style and preference for standing out. Either way, it's clear that Napoleon understood the power of symbolism. His military uniform, complete with the tall bicorne hat, sent a message to his soldiers. He was not just their commander, he was the embodiment of military excellence. Beyond its military use, the bicorne hat also played a role in Napoleon's ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. Napoleon's soldiers were known for their intense loyalty to him, and part of that loyalty stemmed from their admiration for his leadership and his image. The hat became a symbol of that connection, a physical representation of the bond between Napoleon and his men. Whether they were on the battlefield or in camp, Napoleon's soldiers would have immediately recognized him by his hat, reinforcing their trust in his guidance. As you drift into your own peaceful rest tonight, consider the way that small details, like a hat, can shape the way we perceive leaders, whether historical or modern. Napoleon's bicorne hat wasn't just an accessory, it was a strategic element of his military leadership. Just as Napoleon used his hat to communicate strength, authority, and individuality, we too can use the things that represent us, whether through our clothes, our actions, or our words, to shape how we're perceived and how we lead in our own lives. Napoleon's tall hat may have been just one piece of his personal style, but it played a pivotal role in crafting the iconic image that has endured for centuries. To truly appreciate why Napoleon's tall bicorne hat became such an enduring symbol, we need to understand the broader context of the French Revolution. When Napoleon rose to power, France was in the midst of profound political upheaval. The monarchy had been overthrown, the old social order had been upended, and France was searching for a new identity. Amidst this chaos, Napoleon emerged as a stabilizing force, someone who could both maintain order and provide a sense of direction for the country. His rise to power, however, was not just due to his military genius, his image was a crucial part of his success. The bicorne hat, which Napoleon wore with such regularity, wasn't just a military accessory, it became a political statement, especially in the context of the French Revolution. During the Revolution, symbols were immensely important. The tricolor cockade, the revolutionary flag, and the Phrygian cap all became emblems of the new French Republic. Napoleon, however, adopted the bicorne not as a symbol of revolutionary ideals but as a symbol of power and control. His hat represented a shift away from the radicalism of the Revolution and the old monarchy, marking the rise of a new order, one that was neither entirely royal nor entirely revolutionary, but a mixture of both. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's choice of the bicorne was an intentional act of symbolism or simply the military fashion of the time. Some scholars argue that by wearing the bicorne hat, Napoleon was signaling his break from both the old monarchy, which had been associated with elaborate, aristocratic attire, and the more radical symbols of the Revolution. The bicorne allowed Napoleon to project an image that was both modern and militaristic, while still maintaining a sense of tradition and authority. It symbolized his ability to unite the various factions of France, the royalists, revolutionaries, and the army, under a single banner. Interestingly, Napoleon's use of the bicorne hat also helped to distance himself from the chaotic period of the Revolution. The revolutionaries had used their symbols of freedom and rebellion, such as the Phrygian cap, as a direct challenge to the monarchy. But by the time Napoleon came to power, those revolutionary symbols were starting to lose their appeal. The French people, tired from years of upheaval and war, were looking for stability. Napoleon, with his bicorne hat, presented himself as a figure who could restore order to a fractured nation while still respecting the memory of the revolution. He was the bridge between the monarchy's past and the republic's future, and his hat was a visual representation of that middle ground. The bicorne hat thus became more than just a military accessory, it became part of Napoleon's strategy for consolidating his power and winning over a divided France. It gave him an iconic look, one that was instantly recognizable, and it helped him craft an image of a man who was both a military genius and a political leader with the strength to lead the country through difficult times. It was a hat that spoke to both his past and his future, it was a symbol of military authority, but it also reflected his role as the leader of a new, emerging France. As you lie down tonight and drift into sleep, consider how Napoleon used something as simple as a hat to convey his authority, identity, and political vision. It's a reminder that the little things we wear, the symbols we adopt, can have deep meaning and lasting effects, shaping the way we are seen and how we see ourselves. Napoleon's bicorne hat was more than just fashion, it was a symbol of power, a beacon that marked the beginning of a new era for France, and, in many ways, the world. Just like that, the things we choose to surround ourselves with can tell a story that extends far beyond their immediate use. As we explore Napoleon's tall bicorne hat, we can't ignore the ongoing debate among historians regarding its symbolism. Napoleon's hat became such an iconic part of his persona that its meaning has been the subject of much discussion. Was the hat merely a fashion choice, or did it represent something much more profound about Napoleon's identity, his rise to power, and his reign. Scholars have spent years analyzing the hat, trying to determine if it was a simple accessory or if it was an intentional and calculated part of Napoleon's personal and political image. One of the key questions historians still debate is whether the bicorne hat symbolized Napoleon's military prowess, his political ambitions, or something deeper, like his desire for control and power. Some historians argue that the hat was a symbol of Napoleon's military genius. The bicorne was a practical military hat, worn by many military leaders of the time, but Napoleon's consistent and distinctive use of it made it a visual cue for his identity as a leader of armies. In this interpretation, the hat serves as a subtle way to reinforce his connection to the military and his role as an unstoppable force in European politics. It became so strongly associated with him that, for many, it represented his ability to conquer and command. On the other hand, some scholars believe that the hat represented something more than just military authority, it also symbolized Napoleon's power as a political leader. Napoleon's rise to power was marked by his ability to manipulate symbols and public perception. His hat became an essential part of this strategy. By wearing the bicorne at a jaunty angle, Napoleon was not only setting himself apart from other military leaders but also positioning himself as a ruler who was above the chaos of the revolution and the fall of the monarchy. The bicorne hat, in this sense, was a tool to help Napoleon create a personal and distinctive identity as the man who brought stability to France after years of turmoil. Some historians suggest that the bicorne hat was a deliberate attempt to craft a new identity for Napoleon, one that fused both the ideals of the French Revolution and the stability of the monarchy. Napoleon's hat allowed him to project an image of both modernity and tradition. It was a symbol that communicated to the French people that he was the leader who could bring order to the nation, someone who embraced the revolutionary values of equality and fraternity, but who also understood the need for centralized, authoritative rule. In this way, the bicorne hat helped Napoleon walk the fine line between revolutionary ideals and the imperial order that he sought to establish. However, there are those who argue that Napoleon's hat was little more than a fashion statement, a personal preference that had little to do with politics or power. They suggest that Napoleon simply chose the bicorne because it suited him aesthetically or because it was fashionable at the time. After all, many military leaders of the era wore similar hats. In this interpretation, the bicorne was more about conforming to the military fashion of the time rather than being a conscious tool for shaping political identity. Historians still argue over the true significance of Napoleon's bicorne hat, but one thing is clear, it became an inseparable part of his public image. Whether it symbolized his military power, his political control, or just his personal taste, the hat was crucial in shaping how Napoleon was seen by the French people and by the rest of the world. It became iconic, synonymous with his leadership, and instantly recognizable in paintings, sculptures, and later in popular culture. What began as a simple part of Napoleon's wardrobe transformed into a symbol that defined his reign, and in many ways, it continues to define our perception of him today. As you prepare to rest tonight, think about how symbols, even something as simple as a hat, can shape the way we view individuals and leaders. Just as Napoleon used his bicorne hat to communicate power and identity, we too use symbols and outward appearances to project who we are to the world. Whether it's our clothing, the way we carry ourselves, or even our choice of accessories, these small details play a part in how others perceive us. Like Napoleon, we each have our own ways of crafting our public image, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. So, as you settle into your own quiet space, reflect on the ways you shape the world's perception of you, much like Napoleon did with his unforgettable tall hat. As we continue to explore the cultural and symbolic significance of Napoleon's bicorne hat, it's essential to understand how much it shaped his public image. Napoleon, much like other powerful figures throughout history, was acutely aware of the importance of appearances. His ability to craft an image that combined military genius, political authority, and a touch of personal flair was crucial to his success, both during his rise to power and throughout his reign. The tall, angled hat became an essential part of this carefully curated image, one that conveyed more than just fashion, but a sense of control, dominance, and regal authority. Napoleon was a master of propaganda, and his use of his appearance to project power and confidence was strategic. The bicorne hat, worn at a slight angle, became synonymous with his leadership. It wasn't just about the practicality of the hat or its military functionality, it was about how it made Napoleon stand out in a crowd, how it symbolized his place at the top. When you saw Napoleon in his bicorne, you saw not just a general, but an emperor. The hat, in this sense, was an extension of his charisma, amplifying the sense of command he exuded. Napoleon knew that the image of a leader was just as important as his actions on the battlefield. Historians still debate just how much Napoleon consciously crafted his image, versus how much of it was a byproduct of his true nature as a leader. Some argue that Napoleon was deeply involved in controlling his public persona, down to every detail of his wardrobe, including his iconic bicorne hat. They point out that his careful use of symbols, like the hat, was central to his political strategy. He used them to align himself with the power and grandeur of both the revolution and the empire he sought to build. Others suggest that Napoleon's personal preferences, especially when it came to fashion, were driven more by practicality and comfort than by any deliberate image-making strategy. They argue that the bicorne was simply the standard military headgear of the time, and Napoleon's use of it was more out of convention than calculated intent. Regardless of how deliberate Napoleon's use of the bicorne hat was, the impact it had on his image is undeniable. The hat became a tool for shaping public perception, a visual cue that told the world exactly who Napoleon was, not just a military leader, but an emperor of a new France. His use of the bicorne, worn proudly and with authority, reinforced the idea that he was a figure of undeniable power, someone who was both part of the revolutionary tradition and the herald of a new era. The hat wasn't just about his own identity, it was about shaping how the French people saw him and how the world perceived his leadership. In modern times, Napoleon's hat continues to be a powerful symbol. From historical paintings to modern films, the image of Napoleon in his tall bicorne has endured, often representing not just the man himself, but the concept of imperial ambition and military dominance. Even today, when we think of Napoleon, we often picture him in that iconic pose, standing tall with his hand tucked into his coat, his bicorne tilted slightly to one side, commanding the attention of all who gaze upon him. This lasting image is a testament to the effectiveness of Napoleon's use of symbolism and how his public persona continues to shape our understanding of his reign. As you prepare for your own sleep tonight, think about how the image of Napoleon in his bicorne hat still captures our imagination. From paintings to films, his image is immortalized, and it all began with a hat. It's a reminder that sometimes, the smallest details, the things we wear, the way we present ourselves, have the power to shape how others perceive us. Just as Napoleon used his hat to project power, we too have the ability to shape our own public image, with every detail contributing to how we're seen by the world. As we continue to unpack the significance of Napoleon's iconic bicorne hat, let's take a deeper look at the personal connection Napoleon himself had to it. While his public image and the strategic use of his hat are well documented, there's also the more intimate side of the story, how Napoleon felt about the hat, how he viewed it, and how it became part of his personal identity. Napoleon's relationship with his bicorne hat went beyond mere fashion, it was a symbol of who he was, both as a military leader and as a person. Napoleon was famously meticulous about his appearance, understanding that every detail, from his uniform to his accessories, contributed to the way he was perceived by both his soldiers and the public. But what about his personal feelings toward his hat? We know that Napoleon was highly aware of how his image affected his authority, but it's likely that he also had a more personal attachment to the bicorne. It wasn't just a hat that he wore because it was fashionable or because it helped him stand out, it became a part of his identity. Like a crown to a king, the bicorne hat was intrinsically linked to Napoleon's sense of self and his role as a leader. Napoleon's attachment to his hat is evident in many historical accounts. The bicorne wasn't just something he wore for grand occasions or battles, it was part of his everyday attire. He would wear it while receiving visitors, during meetings, and even while in his private chambers. In some ways, it was a way for Napoleon to feel connected to his own power, even in the quiet moments when he wasn't commanding an army or making important political decisions. It was an external representation of the internal confidence he needed to lead. The hat became a reassuring presence in his life, a constant reminder of his status and the empire he had built. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's attachment to his hat was more symbolic or if it was genuinely personal. Some believe that the bicorne was simply a tool of propaganda, something he wore deliberately to maintain a specific image. Others argue that the hat was a more personal artifact, representing a deeper connection to his self-perception. Perhaps it was both. Napoleon was known for his ability to merge personal desires with political necessity, and the bicorne hat may have been the perfect example of this blend. Another interesting aspect of Napoleon's relationship with his hat is how he used it to craft his own narrative. His hat was not just a symbol of military power, it was also a visual representation of his rise from relative obscurity to become the Emperor of France. Napoleon was a self-made man, and in many ways, his bicorne hat symbolized that journey, his ability to rise from the streets of Corsica to the heights of European power. The hat was a visual marker of his transformation from the outsider to the ruler, and it became an inseparable part of his personal story. The fact that it became synonymous with Napoleon himself speaks to the power of symbolism and how Napoleon used it to solidify his place in history. As you settle in to rest tonight, think about the relationship between Napoleon and his bicorne hat. Picture him donning it each day, not just as a military leader, but as a man who understood the power of symbols and their role in shaping identity. Like Napoleon, we too have our own symbols, whether it's a piece of clothing, an object, or a gesture, that we use to project a certain image of ourselves to the world. Napoleon's hat reminds us of the subtle ways in which our appearance and the things we carry with us can tell a story about who we are and how we want the world to see us. As we reflect on Napoleon's personal connection to his iconic bicorne hat, we must also consider its transformation into one of the most enduring symbols in history. Napoleon's tall, angled hat, once merely a part of his military uniform, evolved into an emblematic image that defined his rule and continues to resonate in popular culture today. Its role in shaping Napoleon's iconography is crucial to understanding why it endures as a symbol of power, ambition, and empire. Over time, this hat became inseparable from the figure of Napoleon himself, an instant visual cue that conveyed not just his military might but his entire legacy. The bicorne hat became an essential part of Napoleon's public image. Whether in portraits, sculptures, or even political cartoons, Napoleon was rarely depicted without his signature hat. The hat's unique shape and prominence in these artistic depictions made it one of the most recognizable elements of his persona. In art, Napoleon is often shown wearing his hat with authority, standing tall and commanding the respect of those around him. This visual representation helped cement his image as the powerful, larger-than-life leader he aspired to be. Historians still debate how much Napoleon consciously crafted his public image through his hat, and whether this was part of a larger strategy to cultivate an imperial aura. Some scholars argue that Napoleon was fully aware of the power of imagery and used his bicorne hat deliberately to project authority, shaping his public perception as the leader of an empire. Others suggest that it was less about conscious image-making and more about the symbolism of the military and leadership attire of the time. Regardless, the result was the same. Napoleon's hat became a defining feature of his image, almost as if it were a crown, one that symbolized both his rise to power and his role as Emperor of France. Napoleon's iconic image was further reinforced by his use of the bicorne during public appearances and military campaigns. He didn't wear the hat just for ceremonial purposes, it was part of his daily attire. Whether he was giving a speech, leading troops into battle, or attending a meeting, the hat remained a constant visual symbol of his leadership. It became a tool of both personal expression and public branding. The bicorne was no longer just a hat, it was a part of Napoleon's propaganda, helping to maintain the image of an invincible leader, capable of commanding both military and political forces. In addition to its military connotations, the bicorne hat also became a symbol of Napoleon's ambition and his desire to reshape Europe. The hat was the final piece in crafting the image of Napoleon as a ruler who was both a man of action and a man of vision. As the leader of an empire that spanned much of Europe, Napoleon wanted to make a mark not only through military conquest but through the symbolic power of his appearance. The bicorne hat, in this sense, helped him accomplish both. It was a visual shorthand for the larger-than-life figure he wanted the world to see. Napoleon's hat became so iconic that it transcended his lifetime. Even after his exile and eventual death, the image of Napoleon in his bicorne hat remained a part of his legacy. In art, literature, and even in later political movements, the hat was used to evoke memories of Napoleon's rule, to symbolize authority, and to convey a sense of imperial grandeur. The hat continued to appear in visual representations of power, linking Napoleon's image with ideas of military strength and authoritarian leadership, even in the 19th and 20th centuries. Today, the bicorne hat is as closely associated with Napoleon as his name. Whether it's in modern depictions of Napoleon in film, advertisements, or even political cartoons, the image of the hat continues to evoke a sense of power, ambition, and a particular type of leadership. The hat has become more than just a piece of clothing, it's a symbol of the empire Napoleon sought to create and of the indelible mark he left on history. As you settle into sleep tonight, think of Napoleon in his iconic pose, his tall bicorne hat perched on his head as he leads his troops into battle, or perhaps standing confidently before an admiring crowd. The hat was as much a part of his identity as his military strategy, shaping the way people saw him, and continue to see him, today. Just like Napoleon crafted his image with that simple yet powerful accessory, we, too, have the ability to shape how we are perceived in the world, sometimes through the smallest of details, like the clothes we wear or the way we carry ourselves. Napoleon's bicorne hat has long outlived its days as a mere piece of military attire, becoming a permanent fixture in the popular imagination. Over the centuries, this iconic hat has become synonymous with Napoleon himself, his power, his ambition, and his place in history. But beyond the historical facts, the image of Napoleon wearing his tall, angled bicorne hat has been etched into popular culture, often serving as a shorthand for the very concept of empire and military dominance. From paintings to movies, the hat has been used repeatedly to evoke the grandeur and the complexity of Napoleon's legacy. When you think of Napoleon today, it's likely that the image of him in that distinctive hat springs to mind, regardless of how much you know about his actual military campaigns or political accomplishments. This visual shorthand has made the bicorne hat an enduring symbol. Napoleon, with his hat, became a figure so iconic that even centuries after his death, the image remains vivid. The bicorne became so closely linked to his identity that it's almost impossible to separate the man from the hat in popular culture. In fact, it often serves as the central visual marker of his character in films, books, and even cartoons. It's not just about the physical hat itself, it's about the symbolism it carries. The bicorne hat came to represent more than just Napoleon. It has become a symbol of imperial power and military prowess. Whenever we see the hat, we're reminded of Napoleon's vast empire, his military genius, and his complicated legacy. From the grand portraits of Napoleon standing tall to the modern-day caricatures of the emperor in his military uniform, the bicorne hat continues to serve as a defining feature of his image. Napoleon's hat has become shorthand for the larger-than-life persona he cultivated, and it continues to shape how we think of him as a historical figure. Napoleon's influence in popular culture has only grown with time. Whether in history books, films, or even the comic strips of the 19th and 20th centuries, Napoleon's hat is often the first feature highlighted in any depiction of the French emperor. It's become the visual representation of his leadership, power, and ambition. This iconic image has been reinforced in everything from Napoleonic-themed art to modern cartoons and advertisements, where Napoleon's hat can serve as a recognizable symbol of authority, control, and historical weight. Even outside of history, the bicorne hat has become a symbol that people immediately recognize when discussing figures of power, particularly those associated with military rule. The hat itself has transcended its historical use, becoming a symbol of grandeur and military achievement. It's no longer just a hat, it's a marker of a specific time and a specific type of ruler. Napoleon's legacy continues to loom large in popular culture, and his hat remains one of the most enduring emblems of his life and reign. Historians still argue whether the lasting popularity of Napoleon's hat is a true reflection of his power, or if it's more of a symbol of our modern fixation with iconography. Some suggest that the myth of Napoleon's hat has been built over centuries, growing in stature and meaning until it eclipses the reality of the man himself. Others believe that the image of the hat is a natural and fitting tribute to a ruler whose military genius and ambition made him a defining figure of his era. Regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that Napoleon's hat is one of the most powerful and lasting symbols in Western history. As you settle in tonight, think about how the small details in our own lives, what we wear, what we choose to represent ourselves, can become lasting symbols of who we are. Just as Napoleon used his bicorne hat to shape his image, so too do we craft our own identity through the choices we make. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we all leave behind symbols that define us, much like the unmistakable silhouette of Napoleon in his iconic tall hat. As the years passed after Napoleon's exile and death, the bicorne hat, once so closely associated with him, slowly faded from fashion. The post-Napoleonic world saw a shift in both political leadership and cultural trends, and the extravagant, symbolic hat was replaced by new styles that better reflected the evolving tastes of the 19th century. The end of the Napoleonic era, with its shifting political landscapes and new regimes, marked the decline of the bicorne as a widely worn symbol of military power and imperial authority. Following Napoleon's defeat and the restoration of the monarchy in France, the new rulers were keen to distance themselves from the iconography of his reign. The French monarchy, under King Louis XVIII, rejected many of the symbols that had been associated with Napoleon and the empire, including the bicorne hat. Instead, the royal court adopted new, more conservative fashions that reflected the stability and tradition of the Bourbon dynasty. The monarchy's desire to reclaim authority and assert its legitimacy meant turning away from the excesses of the Napoleonic period, and thus, the bicorne hat, once the emblem of Napoleon's power, was slowly phased out of military and royal fashion. Interestingly, the decline of the bicorne hat didn't happen all at once. It continued to appear in certain military uniforms for a time, especially in the context of ceremonial dress or in older military traditions. But by the mid-19th century, the bicorne was replaced by the shako and other more modern military headgear. These new styles of hats were more practical for the changing nature of warfare, which was moving toward larger armies and more dynamic battle strategies. The old, ornamental bicorne was no longer seen as appropriate for the evolving military needs of the time. Historians still debate the precise moment when the bicorne hat truly disappeared from fashion and military use. Some argue that it gradually faded from the scene as Napoleon's influence waned, while others suggest that it was actively rejected by the new political order after Napoleon's downfall. Regardless of the reasons behind its decline, what is clear is that the bicorne hat, which once symbolized the grandeur of the Napoleonic Empire, eventually gave way to more modern, functional headgear that better suited the needs of the 19th and 20th centuries. However, despite its decline in practical use, the bicorne hat never disappeared completely. Even as it was phased out in daily life, it remained a powerful cultural symbol. Artists, historians, and later filmmakers kept the image of Napoleon and his iconic hat alive. The image of Napoleon standing tall, his bicorne perched on his head, continued to evoke images of power, authority, and military genius. The hat became part of Napoleon's enduring legacy in popular culture, an indelible image that still resonates with us today. As you relax tonight, think about the lasting impact of symbols, how something as simple as a hat can become a powerful representation of an era. Napoleon's bicorne hat may have disappeared from fashion, but it's far from forgotten. It continues to shape our understanding of his time, his leadership, and the way he crafted his image. Just like Napoleon, we too can leave behind symbols of who we are, whether it's through the things we wear, the choices we make, or the legacy we create in the world. Though the bicorne hat may have fallen out of fashion in the 19th century, its symbolic power continues to resonate in the modern era. Today, Napoleon's tall hat is instantly recognizable, not only in historical paintings and books but also in films, cartoons, and advertisements. The hat, once part of his personal style and military identity, has transcended its original purpose and become an enduring emblem of authority, military genius, and imperial ambition. Napoleon's hat has become so much more than just an accessory, it's a visual shorthand for his legacy, shaping how we view both him and the concept of power itself. Napoleon's bicorne has been used to represent more than just the man, it has become synonymous with the notion of authoritarian rule and military might. In political cartoons, the image of the tall hat is often used to symbolize a leader who is domineering, ambitious, or controlling. Napoleon's image, with his hat perched at the perfect angle, is often used to evoke the imagery of a ruler who seeks to impose order, to conquer, and to lead with an iron fist. Whether used in a satirical way or in more serious representations, the hat remains a symbol of the kind of leadership that seeks to control vast empires and shape history. In modern popular culture, Napoleon's bicorne is also frequently invoked to depict the idea of empire building. Whether it's in films like Waterloo or in modern political discussions, the image of Napoleon and his hat often represents the ambition to control, dominate, or reform entire nations or regions. His image, with his hand tucked into his coat and his bicorne hat in place, still carries a sense of power and dominance, an image that resonates with modern depictions of rulers, conquerors, and military leaders. Historians still argue about the true significance of Napoleon's hat in modern symbolism. Is it merely a visual cue used for convenience, or has the hat come to represent something much deeper, something about the nature of power and leadership? Some suggest that Napoleon's legacy is so deeply intertwined with his image that his hat has become a necessary part of how we understand him. Others point out that the cultural context of today is so different from Napoleon's time that the hat's significance may have shifted, now serving as a symbol of the past rather than a reflection of contemporary power dynamics. Regardless of the interpretation, one thing is clear: Napoleon's bicorne hat has stood the test of time as one of the most iconic pieces of clothing in history. Its use in modern representations of power shows how strongly symbols can endure, even when their original context fades away. The way Napoleon's hat continues to appear in modern media demonstrates the lasting power of an image that was carefully constructed and carried through centuries. It is a testament to how Napoleon, through his keen awareness of his own image, cemented his place in history, not just through his military conquests, but through the way he presented himself to the world. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think about how the smallest details, like a simple hat, can have such a lasting impact. Napoleon's bicorne, once just a part of his wardrobe, became a symbol that transcended its original purpose and continues to shape how we view power and leadership today. Just as he crafted his image to reflect his power, we too shape the way we are seen by the world. Whether through our choices in dress or the way we carry ourselves, the images we create in the world have the potential to leave a lasting legacy, just like Napoleon's hat did. As we explore the cultural legacy of Napoleon's bicorne hat, it's essential to understand how his personal style influenced not only his era but also the evolution of fashion in the decades that followed. Napoleon's distinctive look, his military uniform, the strategic use of his bicorne hat, and his carefully crafted public image, set trends that echoed through the early 19th century and even left their mark on later periods. Fashion, particularly military fashion, often evolves based on the figureheads and symbols of the time. Napoleon's personal style became a key part of his identity, and it had a lasting influence on the way subsequent generations viewed power, authority, and military leadership. Napoleon's uniform, for instance, was designed to strike a balance between traditional military attire and the revolutionary ideals that had taken root during the French Revolution. While the monarchy had been overthrown, there was still an affinity for the disciplined and orderly nature of military fashion, especially in the context of a burgeoning empire. Napoleon's style reflected both his military background and his desire to establish a new imperial identity for France. His uniform, with its tailored fit, elegant detailing, and the ever-present bicorne hat, helped to define the look of a leader who wasn't just a soldier but a sovereign, a ruler who was reshaping the political landscape of Europe. The bicorne hat itself, worn sideways, became a symbol of Napoleon's break from tradition. While many military leaders of the time wore hats with a more conventional look, the bicorne was a bold statement that set Napoleon apart. His wearing of it with such regularity, even in ceremonial settings, further solidified the idea that Napoleon was a leader who could blend tradition with modernity, someone who would reshape the future while respecting the past. The hat became part of the uniform that not only made Napoleon look imposing but also communicated his political message: he was a leader with a unique vision for the future of France and the world. Napoleon's influence on fashion wasn't limited to the military realm. His image as a leader who embodied both strength and sophistication became a model for other political figures. In the decades following his reign, military uniforms across Europe took on a more structured and disciplined look, often incorporating elements that were inspired by Napoleon's style. The dramatic epaulets, gold embroidery, and distinctive hats seen on military leaders were all influenced by the Napoleonic style. Even in the world of civilian fashion, Napoleon's influence could be felt. The romanticized notion of Napoleon's imperial style became a point of reference for designers and fashion houses, who looked to his image for inspiration when creating uniforms, military-inspired outfits, and even day-to-day attire. Historians still argue how much of this fashion evolution was a direct result of Napoleon's influence versus the broader social and political changes of the time. Some suggest that the Napoleonic aesthetic was a key influence on the fashion of the early 19th century, creating a trend toward military-style attire for both men and women. Others argue that Napoleon's reign was merely one chapter in a broader shift toward more refined and structured fashion in the post-revolutionary period. Whether it was Napoleon's direct influence or simply a matter of the changing times, his image as a leader, and his carefully constructed style, had a lasting impact on the fashion landscape of his era and beyond. As you prepare to relax tonight, imagine Napoleon in his military uniform, his tall bicorne hat perched at just the right angle, embodying both the strength of an emperor and the sophistication of a military leader. His personal style, as much as his political and military achievements, helped to shape the world's perception of him. Just like Napoleon, we too can influence the way we are seen by the world through our own sense of style and identity, whether through the clothes we wear or the way we present ourselves. Napoleon understood the power of image, how what we wear can become a symbol of who we are and what we stand for. As we reach the end of our journey through the fascinating history of Napoleon's tall bicorne hat, it's time to reflect on just how much this simple piece of headwear became an enduring symbol of power, authority, and personal identity. From its early days as part of Napoleon's military uniform to its transformation into an icon of imperial ambition, the bicorne hat encapsulates the complexity of Napoleon's reign and his ability to control his image. It wasn't just a hat, it was a visual tool that reinforced his military prowess, political authority, and larger-than-life persona. Napoleon's hat became an inseparable part of his identity, recognized the world over. The moment we picture him, we often envision him with that distinct bicorne hat, tilted sideways, commanding the attention of his soldiers, and the world. In fact, it's hard to separate Napoleon's image from the bicorne hat. It has become a symbol of leadership itself, transcending time and place. It was not just about Napoleon's reign, it was about the idea of power, control, and leadership. Even after his exile and death, the iconography of the bicorne hat continued to shape our perception of him. The hat itself became a symbol of the Napoleonic era, a marker of the ambition and drive that characterized his reign. The lasting legacy of Napoleon's hat reminds us of the power of symbols in shaping how we view history and the individuals who make it. Just as Napoleon's hat became a symbol of military genius and imperial rule, we too use symbols, through the clothes we wear, the choices we make, and the way we present ourselves, to craft our own images. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we all leave behind symbols that define us. Napoleon understood the power of image, and his bicorne hat serves as a lasting reminder of how carefully crafted appearance can influence public perception. As you drift into sleep tonight, think about the lasting impact of Napoleon's hat. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a tool that helped Napoleon shape his image as a powerful leader, a military genius, and an emperor. Today, that image still resonates. Whether we see the bicorne in history books, films, or as a symbol of power in modern depictions, Napoleon's hat continues to define how we view him and, by extension, how we understand the nature of leadership and authority. Like the Napoleonic symbol of the bicorne hat, we too can think about the symbols we carry with us, and how they shape our identities.